Roots 101 Deeply Rooted. From the vibrant and storied heart of America, brought to you by the Roots 101 African American Museum. This is the Deeply Rooted Podcast, where we pay homage to the unsung heroes, the pillars of our community, the inventors, the artists, the activists, and our ancestors by highlighting Black excellence of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Your guide on this journey, none other than the passionate and insightful Lamont Collins, a visionary, a mentor, a scholar, and most importantly, a griot of African American history and culture. So sit back, tune in, and let's dive deep into the rich soil as we get deeply rooted.
All right, everyone, time for Deeply Rooted Podcast. Lamont Collins, Roots 101 African American Museum. And you know, I always talk about legacies matter, how education matters, Black excellence all the time, and telling our story 365 days a year. But today I have a young king. I call him Young King. His name is Professor Brandon McCormick. He is the chair of University of Louisville's Pan-African Studies, and he's a young brother and father that I love talking to. So let's get right into it. Brandon, tell them who you are.
Welcome. Thanks for welcoming me having me to the show. I'm glad to be here. I'm Dr. Brandon McCormick. I'm the chair of the Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville. I went to U of L back in the day, left there, went to Nashville, did a doctorate program at Vanderbilt in religion, came back and became the professor of African American religion in the Department of Pan-African Studies at U of L back in 2013. I've been there since 2013 and now became the chair of the department last year, taking over for Dr. Ricky Jones after he stepped aside from that role, but he's still with us in the department.
Well, you know, I'm one of your biggest fans, but I like to talk about Black excellence and talk about Black history. Because I know when I was at University of Louisville and I took a Pan-African Studies course, it changed my life. It really, really, really did. And I know it makes a difference on Black students getting their story told on the college level. Do you feel that statistically, or what?
No, I think that's right. I mean, there's so many people who would say the same thing, right? That taking a class in Pan-African Studies shifted their college trajectory, right? I could say that having taken those classes back in the late 90s when I came in, and that's when Dr. Jones was just getting there, right? And so he was a young professor there. And when I showed up on campus as a Woodford R. Porter Scholar, I remember going to one of the first Porter Scholar meetings, and they said, whatever else you do, because I was an engineering major then, that whatever else you do, you need to take a class in Pan-African Studies. And so I did that, took Intro to Pan-African Studies with Dr. Jones. It was like, oh, wow. Because I was a kid who came from Frankfort, Kentucky, right? So I had gone through the educational system there. And you can imagine what the public school system was and was not teaching in Frankfort. And I got there, I'm like, oh, okay, learning about us. Oh, okay, this is really interesting. Oh, okay. I was still an engineering major, but it planted seeds, right, at that point to say, I need to take another one of these classes, and then I need to take another one of these classes. And then eventually it led to me wanting to do doctoral work that you know, at the end of the day came full circle to me coming back and teaching there because that initial class made such an impact. But I've heard that over and over again. People have gone on to be doctors, gone on to be lawyers, gone on to be dentists, whatever. But they say, but it was the class in Pan-African Studies that I took really that either gave me the confidence to believe that I could go on to do that other kind of work, or that helped me to understand about my people so I'd be a different kind of doctor, a different kind of lawyer.
Right. And then when I call it Roots 101, I call it that because in higher education, first class is a 101.
Absolutely.
So that's one reason it's Roots 101. But when I talk about you, Brandon, I remember you growing and met you at church, and then you were in the ministry, and then you went to Vanderbilt. I remember all the things that you was, and people don't realize what a dynamic minister you are in that pulpit. I think you bring things to young people. You remember, the brother Joe Madison used to say, put it where the goats can get it.
Right.
I always thought you was the kind of minister that could put it where the goats could get it, where kids could eat on what you were saying to them. And I think you've continued to do that and as a professor and as a minister. So I commend you for that.
I appreciate that. That's one of the things. I haven't really been in the pulpit that much, really since COVID. You know, I mean, COVID changed the dynamic on how churches were operating in person and things like that. But I haven't really been. But part of that, I transitioned into administrative roles at U of L and directing the Ann Braden Institute, and then came into the chair. But it's been a while since I've done that. But I think of that as a kind of extension of the teaching that I would do in the classroom. And so there's certain kind of teaching I might do in a classroom, and there's certain people I'm going to reach in the classroom, and there's certain people who ain't never gonna come on U of L's campus, right? But they will be in church on a Sunday morning, right? And so you got to figure out there, and it's an interesting context to be in the congregation, because you got everybody there from the 95-year-old grandmother to the 8-year-old, right, great grandson, and you got to figure out, you got PhDs, you got GEDs, you got people off the streets, you got people who are highly educated and disinterested. You got people who are spiritual and people who, right, aren't. And so how do you say a word, right, that can come down everybody's street? That takes a lot of thinking, and I again think of it as an extension of the work I do as a professor.
Well, I think it's definitely. So I want to talk about Black excellence, and I want to talk about education, because we had a conversation not too long ago when we had the two sisters from the Walk the Pettus Bridge. Did I say it
The
right?
Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
and I think I found out that day that it was a kids march. I didn't know it was a youth march. I never knew that historically, that it was young people. That majority of people on that bridge were young people trying to make a difference. And when every time I'm around you, I think about education and young people. And I know you're bigger than just that, but that's where I think about. So what I want to ask you today or talk about is Black excellence in education. We know what's going on around the world when we talk about educating Black children, whether it's about our history or whether teaching them on a level that's equal to the education other places are getting, whether it's a predominantly white college or whether it's a historical Black college.
Mm-hmm.
And your wife is an educator.
Absolutely.
And I love seeing both you. I love the dynamics of the way both of you
She's
rock.
better educated than me, man. Yeah,
Yeah,
she,
I mean,
you know.
both of you rock. I mean, well, and when I see you guys together, it gives me, it makes me feel that what I'm doing is just extension of what young people can do if you give them the opportunity to do it, and that's
Right.
what we do at Roots. But let's talk about being married to an educator, and let's talk about that dynamic. Then we go to something else. Well, tell me how it is married to someone that's in education too.
Well, it's interesting dynamic because we're having conversations at two different ends of the spectrum, right? So for so long she's at Grace James Academy now, which is a all girls Afrocentric middle school here in JCPS. But before that, I mean, she was early childhood education, so she was doing pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. So she had the youngest of the babies at the kindergarten level, and I had them at the college level, and so the range, but she was teaching those young kids, right, like concepts that were coming out of college, right? And because she firmly believed that they weren't too young to be exposed to high level ideas if somebody would put it where they could get it and get them excited to learn about it. So she was doing things like exposing them to different kinds of maps and look at Africa and how it is on this map, and why is it so much smaller on this map than it is on that map? Because they don't want you to really understand, right, the size of it in proximity to a place like Europe. Now, why is that, right? And then she would have little kids, 5, 6 years old, engaging in ideas like that. Now, she was talking to them about concepts like an African diaspora. What is that? But is that too young for a kid? For her mind, no, because they can get it. But then as time goes on, right, and kids are experiencing more things. I mean, you go up to the kinds of violences that are happening in the community and the kind of trauma from people being shot and killed, or whether it's Breonna Taylor. Now, these young children are also coming into the classroom having those experiences too, and having no context to put them in, and how we got to that kind of place of violence, systemic and otherwise, and racialized violence, and the kind of trauma, right, that it wreaks on young minds, so they can't learn in the classroom ABCs and 1, 2, 3s because they're so preoccupied with the other things that are happening to their uncle, to their aunts, to their cousins.
Life on
And so
life.
how do you then bring that into the conversation in a sensitive way for a young person? So she's a great educator, does really, really good stuff. I learned from her. And then over time, they're going to show up in my classroom, right? And now we have to unpack things at a more complex level. And so sometimes I'm talking about her like, no, but see, now how do I break this down even for a college student? And so we'll have these really interesting conversations. Now, sometimes, it becomes a problem because she thinks she knows more than me. And then sometimes I think I know more than her, and we'll go in, but we'll have good debates.
Right.
And that's how you sharpen each other, right? Because
Iron
you got
sharpen iron.
somebody that is disinterested in learning, or they don't want to know anything. You can't really have a conversation with them. But she's up watching listening to podcasts like this one. She's consuming information. When I'm ready to go to sleep, she's still up learning. So that's really been a good thing for the dynamic between the two of us, because we're both
Well,
interested in knowledge.
well, I think iron sharpens iron, no doubt. But I think black love is the strongest love that's
Hmm.
made, and
Hmm.
you guys symbolize black love to me. Now we talk about education. You have kids, right?
Yep.
And their ages are what?
So our oldest is what, 24 now, out the house. um, 18, just graduated. And then we have an 8-year-old who is, on his way to the third grade, a rising third grader. So we got a big spectrum, right, from 24 to 8 in the house. But that's where our kids are right now.
Well, let me say this: there's what you say, great responsibility and
Hmm.
accountability
Hmm.
for our young kings and queens that are coming up. So, give me an idea when you guys talk about your children. Do you guys talk about what you want? Every parent wants more for their kids than what they had. Okay,
Hmm.
you guys are both educators. What kind of conversation do you guys have on what you want your kids able to achieve? I'm sure it's a conversation, correct?
Yeah, well, we have lots of different kinds of conversations about that. Like right now, so my daughter just graduated high school and transitioning towards college. And so we're having lots of conversations right now just about college and about getting prepared for college even now, and haven't been having that conversation for a while. Like this, it ain't gonna be what it's been in high school. So you gotta, be ready for this new set of challenges and expectations that you're gonna have at the college level. But we've always been trying to prepare them along the way, because we both came from parents who did not go to college, right? So neither of our parents went to college, but for at least my parents, were like, you're going to go. We didn't go, you're going to go, and we're going to make sure that you get there. And so for them, it was, we didn't get to go to college. We want to send you a little further. So I went to college, then went back to college and got a master's, then went back to college and got a PhD. So I went way farther than what they were able to achieve. Now the question is, how much farther can we send, right, our sons, our daughters, right, and to give them a head start and put them up on game that we just didn't have. So even now we're filling out applications and we're filling out scholarship forms and FAFSA and all these kinds of things that a lot of parents don't even know because they haven't been in that system. We've been in spaces to be able to say, look, go this path, don't go that path, right? Go check into this and not that. Here's the pitfalls to avoid. So we've really been trying to do a lot to prepare them with the lessons that we didn't have, and to be able to give them opportunities that we simply didn't get. For instance, right now we're having this conversation with our daughter who was accepted into Howard University, right? And then this is the conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
Now, we didn't have that chance. She and I, when we came out, again, our parents didn't go, and financially speaking, it was like, well, you gonna go to UK or U of L, right? I mean, that was really the only things open because of in-state tuition.
Mhm.
We're in a little bit different position where, yes, it would be cheaper to go to a University of Louisville, but Howard is a different kind of cultural experience. It's an HBCU. It has the opportunity, right, to shape and mold her in a very, very different way than the University of Louisville would. No shade to the University of Louisville necessarily, because I'm in a department of Pan-African Studies within a white university, whereas a Black Studies department, we're still trying to do that same kind of work. But it ain't nothing like, right, being able to have the opportunity to step on the century, or the long legacy of history that Howard University has had in educating Black students. So
Yeah.
if we can send her there to the Mecca, that's a different
Yeah.
kind of ball game.
Yeah, I remember when we talked about it, is that we all, especially those that didn't go to historical Black colleges,
Right.
and we achieved some kind of status, we wonder
Hmm.
how great we could have been
Yes, sir.
if we were in that Black excellence
Mhm.
setting.
Hmm.
And I think you saying the same thing. You and your wife were going together and said, wait a minute, if I can send them to the Mecca, I can send them to Howard or Spelman.
Right.
Is that not my responsibility? Not saying the other HBCUs not that either.
Oh, absolutely.
But if I'm able to send them to what they consider the best of a best,
Hmm.
how great would my children be?
That's right. I mean, and that's what we're thinking. I mean, those of us who value Black culture, right? Because we can have the conversation about whether there were generations of Black folk even in the past who would have, had they had the option between a predominantly white institution and an HBCU.
Still
said,
would've took the white
I'm sending my kid to the white institution,
Which still
right?
goes on today.
Right, which still goes today because the white man's ice is colder.
That's right.
Right, and so we didn't value our Black institutions in that same way. Some of them, and some of it is because that generation didn't have as many options, so they were limited to, in their mind, and limited to HBCUs and didn't have the opportunity to go to PWIs. And so now once that door is open, we're going to go there and never look back. And I think the tide has turned, especially when we talk about since the violence of summer 2020, right? And what we've seen in so many institutions, and we've seen the attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion, the attacks on African American studies from Republican lawmakers, right? That now parents are having very different conversations with their children and say, no, we want to send you somewhere where you're going to be affirmed, where your personhood is going to be affirmed, where you have people who care about you, you're going to learn something about yourself, and where there's traditions of excellence. And we're going to start sending you to HBCUs instead of these PWIs. And I think that's a big shift in the conversation.
But even with that shift, we know the limited financial aid that historical Black colleges have. Someone like you and your wife, I'm sure the income's nice between the two of you, but now you're going to make a conscious effort.
Right.
If Howard or Spelman doesn't have the financial aid, or U of K that's a full ride, or U of L's a full ride because you're a professor, where's our responsibility to our kids, and what do we give up in order to make sure they don't give anything up?
Yeah, that's a layered conversation, right? So I think there's a lot that goes into any particular parent making that decision for their children, right? And I think you got to make the right decision for your family. Maybe sending them to a UK or a U of L as opposed to a HBCU based upon finances might be the best decision for your family at that time, given what you can do, right? Because even when we took our daughter to the admitted student day for Howard, there's a lot of parents in there asking that question, like, look, this is $50,000+ a year, right? And there's limited financial aid, and we know the historical reasons for that because the endowments at HBCUs have never been what PWIs have been for all kinds of reasons that you can imagine, right? But are we as parents being responsible if we are setting our children up for significant debt that they will have to pay back, especially as Black kids, right, who are more likely to earn less for the same jobs as their white counterparts? Is it responsible parenting, right, to put them in a position, or ourselves in a position, to accumulate that kind of debt? And that's a conversation that a lot of parents are having to have, and that's a real conversation. So it's not simply just, do I send my kid to the Black school?
So
or
it's
the
a
HBCU?
Conversation that you guys are having too.
We have to have it too.
Okay.
We had to have it too. But I think that goes back to the part of the sacrifice piece. Like, what are we as parents willing to sacrifice for our kids' education, right? So, I mean, there's things that we could have. I mean, you know, my wife would say, well, you know, I really need another car, but I'm willing to delay that for some time because this right here is more important. You know, there are things, maybe we want to go on a trip. Maybe we, you know, as we get older, we want to travel more. Well, okay, maybe that has to be delayed because this right here is important. And I think we have to come to that kind of, you know, conclusion that our children's education is important and it's an important investment. Now we're doing that, and this maybe shift the conversation at a moment where not just in Black communities, but the larger U.S. society is calling into question the value of a college education.
Period.
Period, right? And Black parents, white parents. I read an article just a little bit ago from Business Insider. It was about this white lady, businesswoman, and it said, the article was something to the effect of, I made $550,000 last year, but I refused to pay for my children's college tuition. Now you think about it, this is a woman, not even including her husband's salary, that she made $550,000 last year, but she says, I will not pay for a dime of my kids' education because I don't believe that it is worth the investment. And I don't believe that they will get the return on the investment that is worth if they're paying, say, $200,000 over 4 years. Right. So that's the kind of national conversation that we're having. Now, I don't, you know, when I read the article, you know, I look at it like, I think this is really more about you not wanting to put out the money, and not because you don't believe it's a good investment, right? But it's also because that mother believes there are other ways for her child to be successful.
And it probably is
for her child,
yeah.
Right? Because if she's making $550,000 a year, she's connected to people that got money, and networks that got money, and she knows that she got connects that she can put her child on, right? That if they never walk in the door of a school, they can still come in making six figures because she got those kind of connections. Black families don't have that kind of access and resources. So we got to have very different kinds of conversations about what is the value of a college degree for us, right? And I still think it matters for us and our children, right?
So more and more you hear it's a lot of talking heads, right? Everybody's got a microphone. We're hearing about black kids going to college more now than ever before, right? And they're using the return on investment, how much money they make when they get out, the whole works, to discourage black kids from getting degrees. At least that's the way I see it. And if that is the thing that's being thrown out there now that our children are taking advantage of education and they're saying you don't need it, you can go AI, you can start your own business tomorrow. Like it's so simple to be successful.
Right.
Not knowing a lot of those people that start AIs and all had connections anyway, right? So do we have to pump our brakes as black parents, or we stay on the gas and say, you take the educational road to get to where you have to go?
I think we got to stress it. I think we have to stress the significance of education. Now, I want to say that with a caveat, right? That there are different ways to do that, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to go to a 4-year college. I think those are great. It could be a 2-year associate's. It could be a vocational training. But you got to get some education to get the trade, to get, to whatever it is. But I do think that education remains important, even if you're talking about AI. You got to intelligently be able to use that.
Correct.
Right? You got to intelligently be able to create, because if that's the case, everybody's just going to do it. And you still got to be smarter than the next person to be able to figure out how is that sustainable to have a steady income that's also going to have some benefits, that's also going to have some insurance and things like that. And if we're just looking for the easy way out or the quick way or the quick road, well, I can just have AI think for me. No. You got to have some critical thinking skills for yourself to be able to make some serious life decisions, right? And I think so you go back to the church thing. I was just at church yesterday, and the pastor was preaching about the wise man who builds his house on a rock, and the foolish man that builds his house on sand, right? And one of the points he was making was that the wise man had to take the time and the effort to dig down till he hit something solid to build on. But the foolish man was in such a hurry to throw up the house that would look just as nice as the other person's house that he just wanted to throw it quick on the sand. But as soon as the storm comes, that's what's going to expose what kind of foundation that you've really laid to build your life on. And I would say the same thing educationally speaking. If you're just say, I'm gonna fall back on AI or technology or something like that, well, okay. But in my estimation, that's like building a house on sand. You can build it up and put it up pretty quickly, but if something come and test that, that house probably gonna fall quicker than the house that was built on a solid educational foundation.
So, and I love that analogy. And Reverend Williams always puts it down anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you talk about, foundation as black parents, and we know foundation is education, but financing is a real part of what we do.
Absolutely.
And everybody wants a return on investment, and nobody can guarantee a return on investment on anybody.
Yep.
But definitely not your child.
Right.
They fall in love. They decide to do different things. But from what I'm hearing and from what I'm thinking, I think we talked about before, we have to stress education in some form in our community and not make kids feel education doesn't matter. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely. We have to stress it. We're having a conversation about higher education. We have to have a conversation about education, from right pre-K, right, to reading bedtime stories that matter, right? Because there's all kinds of good Black children's literature out here right now that should be read to our 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. There are all kinds of ways that we're doing informal education, because we know we have to do that too, because that's the other thing about it. While we value education, we have always also been suspicious about the educational systems that we've sent our kids in, because they've been predominantly white, right, by predominantly white teachers who haven't cared about our kids and haven't taught them about us. So we've always had to do supplemental education when we've been suspicious about the K through 12 and even the higher educational institutions. So we still have to do our own education outside of that, but we still have to be going through those institutions, I think, in order to pick up some important foundational skills and tools to be able to do the kind of work that we need in life. And yes, the financial cost of it, especially for college education, matters. But I think there are all kinds of things that we, again, have to do our homework on and educate ourselves on about. Here are these 529 plans and these other kinds of ways that you can invest from a very early age, right? So that you're not trying to figure it out when they're 16, 17, 18, but you're investing in college because you know it's important when they're 1, when they're 2, when they're 3.
Is that something as a community, we need to do a better job
I
of
think we need
wealth
to
development?
so even folks as educated as my wife and I
Mhm.
didn't know enough about those things,
Okay.
right? Until here recently.
Okay.
Okay. I was talking to a brother in DC. His son also goes to Howard. He's like, no, man, we've been doing this 529 plan since they was kid. I was like, bro, we didn't even know about that. We didn't even have that kind of information or education. Now we know now.
Right.
So then by the time our 8-year-old comes around, we know better, we do better.
That's right.
We can't beat ourselves up for not knowing that, but we're at least in a decent enough position to be able to figure out, and we don't have the whole road mapped out, right? And this is a faith walk. We could say, all right, right now we could figure out how to get you to year 1.
Mhm.
We'll cross year 2 when we get to year 2. Let's figure out year 1 first, right? And then let's go forward from there. But I was saying, I read the story in Business Insider about the white woman who refused to pay for her kids' college. But I read another story in the HBCU News Network about a young brother who just graduated from Morehouse, and he tweeted afterwards that he wanted to give a shout out to his uncle. The uncle was incarcerated, but the uncle took out a loan. The uncle, incarcerated man, took out a loan to help him pay the gap of what he didn't have to finish graduating from Morehouse. And he was saying, if it hadn't been for my uncle incarcerated, I wouldn't have been able to graduate from Morehouse because my uncle took out the loan. Now, I in fact checked all the details, but it was an interesting narrative because it's a very different story. You got this wealthy white woman that says it's not worth the investment. I'm not paying for a dime of my college kids' education, versus this young brother who went to Morehouse and got a black man behind bars who said, it's so important because I don't want you where I'm at, that I'm willing to take out the loan and go in for that even after I come out to make sure that you got what you need to get that degree, right? And that's a very different kind of model and a very different way of thinking about the value of education that I really appreciated reading that story.
And I think when I talked to you before, I think that's a hidden thing that we need to talk about. Because it's going to be debt with children. You know, I got kids all finished school, and you know, you got the student loan, you got the FICA, all those things are out there, right? That they're still dealing with trying to buy their first house, right? So I think we need to be intentional that we need to grapple with the whole thing, because like you said, the lady that had the 550,000, she's got the resources. She knows people have done this. She probably knows a way that the kid's gonna go free at Harvard anyway, right? But for the black family, what can we do collectively? I know what you've done, what your wife done, but what should we do, or should we create? And maybe there's a program around the city that is doing that, and I just don't know about it. But how can we make our kids understand? We know you're gonna have debt. You know, me and my wife always sacrifice for our kids, so it was nothing new for us, just like you doing for yours. But how can we get smarter? How can we learn about the plans that are out there, money you can put into? Is that something collectively we need to do from church standpoint, from the Urban League standpoint? What do we need to do as black people, knowing if we know better, we can do better? How can we collectively make that happen?
Well, on the spot, I don't have all the specific answers to that. But I think, one, I mean, this conversation that you're having, so thank you for having this and hosting this and bringing this to light. I mean, and those people who are listening who have the institutional connections and the wherewithal, the know-how, right? Let's plug in. Let's figure out how to funnel that through our black institutions, through the Urban League, through our black churches, and say, look, I work at a bank. I understand how these things work. Let me offer some of my time and expertise to hold a workshop at this church and invite the young people there, right? And so so churches are regularly taking kids for spring break on like black college tours,
all day long,
right? But I don't know how much this financial piece is part of the conversation.
That's what I'm saying.
So there's always some good work being done and in place, but maybe somebody who has that expertise now can come alongside. Let me go on a tour with y'all, so that we can have that part of the conversation either before we leave or when we get back on the way, right? So we can have the whole conversation, because otherwise we just get caught off guard at the last minute and we haven't done the preparatory work. We don't know.
Yeah, I could think how many people, just when I was in college in the 80s, how many people had to leave school because they didn't have enough money when it came for the next semester.
That's right.
I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I probably, God.
And that number is so high among black students, right?
Unbelievable.
Because even at U of L, we talk about how relatively few, right? Still, the numbers are low in terms of black student population there, but compared to the number that we get there for the freshman year, and then how many we lose between the freshman and the sophomore year, or between the sophomore and the junior year, right, is higher among black students. And one of those major reasons is because
It's
they're
finance.
incurring,
Yeah.
those financial
Right.
hardships, and they can't afford
Mhm.
to be able to come back the next semester.
Right. And much as you have a good auntie and a great auntie,
Mhm.
they don't have the resources to give you the money to stay in college.
They don't have it, right?
They don't
That's
have
right.
it. I'll give you $500 and you're sitting at home because nobody else has it.
Mhm.
And that's the sad thing in our community.
If we invest earlier, right? Because what we want to do is avoid the debt, because the debt is a trap.
Right.
And we know that our people get trapped in debt and we can't pay it off, and then we're transferring debt to our children too. So that's a whole problem in itself. So if we're planning better earlier, if we're making small investments, if we're making wise decisions, and we're figuring out how do we make those sacrifices while they're still young, then hopefully we're in a situation where we don't have to take out as much debt. And then we get educated on all of the grant programs, all of the scholarship sites. But that's a job. That is a full-time job, looking for scholarship, because there are thousands of them out there. Not everyone is for you. Some are very specific, only for these students, only for those in a certain area, only for these but you got to comb through scholarship after scholarship after scholarship to find the one that is right for you, that you can apply to. And you got to be doing that every day, right? While especially in their high school years, because I've heard those stories of people like, look, we got $500,000 in scholarship. We ain't had to pay nothing because my son applied for everything and got the money, because there was so much money that people were just trying to give away because people weren't applying for it.
And
Right?
I remember a time doing, like I said, when I was in school, or probably when my kids were in school, where some programs were getting so much money for kids to come, but the kids didn't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well, that's right too.
They didn't want to go to those schools. Like, for instance, some Northern Kentucky. Let's say Northern Kentucky had a free scholarship, 4-year scholarship, and our kids at Achievers or whatever, nobody wanted to go.
Right.
So I think it's something that we have, as education. One, we do want our kids. I think we want our kids to go to historical black colleges, but we also want kids to take advantage of the education. And then I think as parents, we need to know all the financial traps that we can get out of, or all that we can create for kids to be successful. And I'm not so sure if we've done that as a black community. Is there a slushy auntie fund where all the aunties in the family put in $5 to make sure some kid goes to college within the family? Because there used to be a time where black families made sure the brightest got to college. Not 8 of the kids, but at least 1 of the kids. How can we go back and create that kind of, instead of a pocketbook fund, it's an educational funds within schools, within families. I know locally there's, God, I'm looking right at him. He's an insurance salesman. His wife, Baker, the Baker family. Baker family has a family foundation that they do, that they put money into, and they make sure the money goes to the kids that are seniors that year. And it's a substantial amount of money. I think they go to Kentucky State because they're Kentucky State graduates. But I thought it was a great concept that they're growing the kids up knowing the family's going to raise dollars for their children to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great way at a family level. And the question is, how do we scale that up to a community level, right?
Yes.
And so that it's greater impact. And that's a question of priorities. Again, how much do we prioritize and value education and want to invest in it? But so churches will have scholarship funds, and there'll be other organizations that'll have scholarship funds. Are we investing in that, right?
Yeah.
Are we finding those places that are giving out, and we want them to have more, so we're going to invest some dollars in there so that when it comes time to dole out that pot, they'll have that. So I think that's part of the strategy as well, to make sure that we collectively are invested in our families, but also in our communities, so that when kids are ready to go, those funds will be there.
And at Roots, people buy a T-shirt that says, "Make my ancestors proud." And I say we need to stop buying those shirts and make sure our descendants be successful, because it's about our descendants too. And I don't know collectively if we've done that enough, or we need to grow inside ourselves to make sure that our children need to be successful, and it's on us, because soon, which you know better than I know, we pretty soon be under minority rule. Black people dominate the color of black people over this country on the nationwide. We're not the minority, we're the majority, but we have no power with it. And then if we go to the Supreme Court, and all of a sudden those people on the Supreme Court will outrule the majority, what world are we going to be in the next few years? So I think we really have to make education important, and we need to really let kids know that we have to learn how to use the system and not to let the system use us. So teachers like you do that. So I appreciate you. And a good conversation. I don't know if we got to everything, but I know we opened some doors that we know kids have to deal with, which is having the financials to move on to school, and then have the credibility to stay in school. Like I said, there's too many people I remember that one semester they're gone the next semester, over $400 and $500, and I don't think that should have ever happened in my lifetime when I was in school, or definitely why I'm out of school. So thank you for having us coming to us today. This is Lamont Collins, Deeply Rooted. Legacies matter, and so do you. And today, education matters today and tomorrow. Have a blessed day. See you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. Always.